Hello and welcome to another episode of Osgoode Community Chronicles, where we explore the rich history, vibrant events, and remarkable stories that make up the Osgoode ward and surrounding communities. In each episode, we dive deep into our local heritage, drawing from the meticulous records and research of our local historians and families. These invaluable resources allow us to bring you stories from the past, ensuring that the traditions that shaped our community are shared with future generations. Whether you're a lifelong resident like me, or a newcomer, join us as we tie our fascinating history to the present-day version of our beloved region of Osgoode and surrounding communities. I'm your host, Tracy Daviero. Well, there was a lovely send-off for Chris O'Brien at the Legion a week or so ago, and I was able to meet many of her siblings, the Gillisees, at the reception at the Osgoode Legion. I did ask the ones I met if they knew what the connection was between their family, the Gillisees, and my Uncle Bill Gillisee, the one who was killed in the war, but nobody seemed to know. So we're going to investigate that in the coming weeks, because I'm sure there's a connection there, and I know probably of some people in the country out here who will know what that is. Last week's episode about the ice storm of '98 started some memories coming in from those who lived through it, like we did. I would love to hear more of what you have to say. Please send your memories to me via Messenger or by commenting on the website. It was indeed the best of times and the worst of times. In today's episode, we're going to talk about our news and events as usual. Our business segment talks about the millinery trade. In our historical segment, we meet the McCaul family. In our Community Voices segment, that comes from the Rideau Township Historical Society, about women in business, and we'll finish up with our mental health moment that is actually happening in real time in our community. Let's get into it. Every week on the podcast, we'll share some of the local events that are taking place in the area. So many great people doing great things. Please be sure that you get out to support them. Just a bit of news first. The Osgoode Township Fish, Game and Conservation Club's Ice Shack is out for the season on the ice. Members will get the combination to the door lock by email, but if you're not a member, you have to join the club or go with a member. Maybe we'll see you there. January is Alzheimer's Awareness Month in Canada. We got together for dinner last week with some cousins, and we're talking about my grandpa, Ernie. So he'd be my grandpa, some of their dads, and some of their uncle. He was related to all of us, and what we went through as a family whenever he had Alzheimer's for 7 years. Of course, my grandma, Mary, bore the brunt of it, but we all have memories, and one of the things that I remember most, I wasn't very old, is that we sure didn't know much about it back then. We didn't know what would happen, how to handle it, or anything like that. And he died in 1987. So Alzheimer's Awareness Month, very important for those who are suffering now and how you can help. Osgoode Youth Association has opened their registration for their upcoming camps, the March Break Camp for grades 2 to 6, Leadership Camp for grades 7 to 12, and summer camps for grades 2 to 6 as well. Details are all on their website, and registration is available there as well. Interesting note in Councillor DeRuse's email newsletter this week, this past Christmas, Parkway Church in Greeley launched their new food pantry, the Village Storehouse. It's a non-perishable food and hygiene storehouse for those in need, and it's a take as needed, drop off to fill up community engagement model. Very nice to hear. And of course, our O-Train line opened on January 6th with service from Limebank Road down to, well, LeBreton Flats, basically. I think it's very exciting stuff. It's currently running Monday to Friday only, with the weekend being phased in at a later date. I intend to check it out soon, and it will definitely be used for our trips to Blues Fest this year. Where will you go on it? And here are our events for this week. Every Monday, of course, there's euchre at the Osgoode Legion starting at 6:30 p.m. Everyone is welcome. And they have darts on Tuesday and bingo on Thursday as well. Beth Donovan Hospice is hosting a grief cafe at Knox Presbyterian Church in Manotick on January 17th at 1 p.m. It's free to attend, an informal and compassionate gathering for anyone experiencing loss. It is facilitated by Debbie Charbonneau and Valerie Oldfield. Also on January 17th, Oya and Avka are jointly presenting a glow dance. It's Friday night, ages 9 to 12, and it takes place at St. Paul's Church on Main Street, Osgoode, and the tickets cost $10 per youth. They are available online. On January 18th, the Russell Legion is hosting their euchre tournament starting at 7 p.m. All levels are welcome and there's no partner needed. The cost is $15 per player and also includes light snacks. Also on January 18th, Angelina in Manotick is having an après-ski outdoor party on their patio. It starts at noon with DJ Matt Doe. Be sure that you dress for the weather. Also on January 18th, at the North Grenville Public Library, there's a repair cafe. Such a cool idea, guys. Starts at 11 a.m. and all you have to do is bring your project that needs to be repaired to the cafe. It can be a small electrical item, some kind of a sewing repair, woodworking, toys, that type of thing. And you can get one-on-one help to learn how to fix it. Saving money by repairing instead of replacing is their motto. Keeping broken items out of the landfill and connecting with the community as you share your skills as well. On January 19th, the Rito Snowmobile Club is having their annual breakfast starting at 8:30 a.m. at the Pierce's Corners Hall, which is Marlborough Community Center. Ride in by sled on trail number 55. It's a buffet breakfast, $15 for adults and $8 for kids. You can get your tickets online before you go. Every Tuesday at the Workshop Dance Studio in Kemptville, there is drop-in line dancing. It's $10 for a full hour starting at 6:30 p.m. and includes free parking. There's also line dancing at Holy Trinity Anglican Church Hall in Metcalfe every Tuesday at 7 p.m. by Sandy's Dance Studio. Vernon Library has Family Story and Play on Wednesdays at 4 p.m., January 22nd and 29th this month. At the Greeley Library, you can register to create clay illustrations on January 23rd, and as well they host Family Story and Play on Mondays at 10 a.m. and Baby Time and Play at 2:30 p.m. every Monday. On January 23rd, there's a French conversation group starting at Metcalfe Library. 6:30 p.m. every second Thursday. It's a drop-in where you can practice your French conversation skills. The other dates are February 6th and 20th and March 6th and 20th. It's Robbie Burns Night at the Kemptville Legion on January 24th. The Kemptville Legion pipe and drums and dancers from the Andrea Gorel School of Highland Dancing will perform at 6:30, followed by the presentation of the haggis. $50 includes your dinner and entertainment. There are still some tickets left for the January 24th Metcalfe Golf and Country Club Winter Buffet. It's a 4-course dinner with your choice of Korean dried spiced pork tenderloin, garlic butter shrimp skewers, or roast beef au jus for $47 per person. Reserve your table today. On January 25th, Manotick Legion is hosting their Robbie Burns Dinner and Dance. It's a 3-course meal with haggis, and the tickets are $35. There are limited tickets available for that one. January 25th in Metcalfe is MDHA Trivia Night. It's a fundraiser for the Metcalfe Jets, hosted by Cheryl Cooper, Jamie Hodges, and Natalie Curry. $25 per person, or you can reserve a table of 8. MDHA Trivia Night. In Kemptville that night, the January 25th, is A Killing in Kemptville. It's a murder mystery dinner theater. A fundraiser for House of Lazarus that we talked about last week, and the Kemptville Hub, hosted by North Grenville Community Theatre Group. It takes place at St. John's Church and starts with a chili tasting competition and silent auction, and then the mystery begins. Tickets for that are $50 per person. And Lisa Dooner reminded me this week that there are only 9 weeks left till St. Patrick's Day. Thanks, Lisa. Tick, tick, tick. Our youth associations host their regular events. They continue. Oh Yeah has teen drop-in for grades 7 to 12 on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. GYA, which is the Greeley Youth Association, has free drop-in on Mondays. And the Youth of Manotick Association has their preteen nights on Friday nights and youth drop-in also on Friday nights. And I came across the Kemptville Youth Association as well, and their calendar includes a lot of different things. Mental Health Mondays, a cooking program, music, D&D, scrapbooking, board games, and more. On January 20th, they're hosting a Monitor Your Feelings as part of their Mental Health Mondays. It is on, of course, Blue Monday. They welcome talking about your feelings as a way to acknowledge your mental health. And that is our news and events for this week. In this week's Business Spotlight, I want to talk a little bit about a craft or a trade, I guess, called millinery, hat making. Millinery refers to the design, creation, and sale of women's hats and other headwear. This craft has a rich history, combining functional, artistic, and cultural aspects. The historical background includes its origins. Millinery originated in the 16th century, with the term deriving from milliners, referring to people from Milan, Italy, known for producing fine quality accessories, including hats. In the 18th and 19th centuries, millinery gained prominence, particularly among the upper classes. Hats became status symbols with elaborate designs featuring feathers, ribbons, lace, and flowers. And in the 20th century, the practice has expanded to cater to a broader audience, reflecting evolving fashion trends. However, industrialization and ready-to-wear fashion led to a decline in bespoke millinery. There are a number of crafting techniques involved in millinery: blocking, where hats are formed using wooden or metal blocks as molds, and felt or straw is steamed, shaped, and stiffened over the block to create the desired shape. Sounds kind of like cowboy hat making to me, doesn't it? Trimming is where the hats are decorated with various materials such as ribbons, bows, feathers, beads, and flowers. And this is where customization and artistry can really come in. Sewing and assembly is the next step, with fabrics, linings, and trims all being stitched together either by hand or with high-powered sewing machines. And precision and attention to detail are really important to ensure durability as well as aesthetics. And finishing, where the hat is ironed, polished, or further embellished to achieve a polished look. Labels and interior fittings like sweatbands are also added at this stage. Different styles and materials used for hat making include felt, straw, cinnamon, which is a natural fiber, silk, velvet, and wool. Styles that you are no doubt familiar with over the years. Bonnets were popular in the 19th century. Cloche hats were the close-fitting, bell-shaped sort of style from the 1920s. And fascinators, ever popular through the British culture, are the lightweight decorative headpieces often used for formal occasions. The role of milliners in society included the customization, creating one-of-a-kind designs tailored to the client's preferences, maybe the occasion and a personal style. Also cultural significance. They often hold ceremonial importance, such as a fascinator at a British royal event, like I said, or the wide-brimmed hats that you see at the Kentucky Derby. And of course, fashion influence. Milliners like Philip Treacy and Stephen Jones have kept the art alive by collaborating with designers and creating iconic headpieces. Modern millinery is not as widespread as the past, but it's still an artisanal craft, often focused on bespoke and kind of couture markets. Many modern milliners focus on sustainable practices, using eco-friendly materials, recycling, upcycling, and promoting slow fashion. Millinery workshops and courses do continue to attract enthusiasts interested in learning this traditional craft. The enduring appeal of millinery lies in its unique blend of fashion, art, and craftsmanship. Whether for practicality or elegance, hats remain a versatile and expressive accessory. Of course, many of you will know my cousins Lola McAvoy and Mitch Corriveau, who owned and operated Cornerstone Farm and Millinery in Glengarry County for many years. They recently sold it and moved back to our area. I'm so glad I got to go and see it in person not terribly long ago. Now, why is millinery a topic of interest for our podcast this week? Because it's mentioned in our historical segment and in our community voices segment. Keep listening. That is our business spotlight for this week. This week's historical segment, we are talking about the McCaul family, M-C-C-A-U-L. Peter McCaul the second, I guess his father was also Peter McCaul, came to Osgoode in 1831 from Perthshire, Scotland, en route to London, Ontario, to visit a former neighbour, also from Perthshire, Scotland. The neighbour was Daniel McMartin, and Daniel persuaded him to remain here in Osgoode. He bought a lot near the McMartins, lot 40, concession 5, for £85 from a gentleman from Cornwall in 1836. That is just west of Vernon, on around where the McDermotts and the Campbells and some of the Fergusons have settled. We've talked about many of those families in previous episodes. A log house and barns were built on the highest area of the lot. The McCauls were from Breadalbane, Kilterry area in Scotland, which was a Baptist church area. Peter also kept in touch with those who had come over from that same area in Scotland that settled in Breadalbane, Ontario, which is around Fergus, Ontario area. They had formed the Baptist church in that area of Ontario, and Peter helped establish it in this area. Peter McCaul married Grace MacDonald, and they had 7 children. Donald Daniel married Nancy McGilvery. He remained on the family farm for a few years after his father's death, but then trained as a Baptist minister and was pastor in Wellesley, Ontario. When his former neighbor Alexander MacDonald from Ormond moved west as a pioneer missionary, Donald followed, forming the First Baptist Church in Winnipeg. Donald and Nancy had 6 children: Mary J., Peter, Eva, John, Margaret, and Robert. Robert married Margaret Maud, and he was the pastor of the Baptist Tabernacle in Brooklyn, New York, and in 1939 actually came back to Osgoode for the 100th anniversary of the Baptist Church here. Donald had 5 other siblings. Grace did not marry. Janet and her sister Catherine died young. Alexander married Jane Ann Cowan, sister of the postmaster in Vernon. Alexander inherited the west half of the family farm at Lot 40 when his mother Grace died. On the southwest corner, his parents had given up a lot for Swale School. A couple of notes about the Swale School, built in 1898. It was somehow a hot topic of conversation due to its location. It was the most northern school in the Osgoode area at the time. There were reportedly disputes about its boundaries. The school was to serve a 16-mile square area, both Osgoode and Mountain. Possibly the location was an issue because it was so far north on the McCaul property. In any case, when the dispute ended, the Mountain folks won and the school was relocated to Belmead Road, or around Belmead Road. A year later, the Osgoode folks regained control of it and planned to move it back. I've read that it actually got moved several times back and forth, up and down the road, but the final news reports that the school was left on the side of the road by the contractor moving it, and it was burned through the night. Before all the school stuff, Alexander died in 1886 at age 44 after his leg had to be amputated from a tree-felling accident. Alexander and Jane had 3 children: Lorenzo Peter, Valletta, and Norman Alexander. His widowed wife Jane remarried a man named McBride. John inherited the east half of the family farm where he lived with his sisters Grace and Margaret, Margaret being the youngest who did not marry. Lorenzo Peter married Lydia Evans. He lived with his Uncle John for a few years after the father's death until he married. Lydia's wedding dress, which was a wool 2-piece ivory-colored outfit, is in the collection at the Osgoode Museum. He farmed West Lot 40 and built a new barn in 1909 and later the brick house. He was a big part in building the Baptist church in Vernon. He was an honored deacon. The farm was eventually sold to Lloyd McNaughton in 1943. Lydia died in 1909, and Lorenzo remarried, this time to her sister, Jane Ann, in 1912. In total, there were 7 children. Margaret Jane, she's the one who wrote the Pioneer Family story. I don't believe she's married, or she got married. Alexander died young, and Henry Lloyd died young. The next siblings, who were Jane Ann's children, Mildred Evelyn married Kenneth Saunders. Kathleen Vera married Kenneth Earl Wright. Beatrice Irene married a man named MacDonald. Bessie Edith married Bryden Morton Cruikshank. So there were no McCall's names carried on through the Lorenzo marriages. Valletta married Albert Murdoch and farmed in Osgoode and Mountain. She was a milliner, which I have learned essentially means hat maker, and now you know that too. They had 7 children. Lucinda Jane, Lloyd Edward, and Norman Elmer all died young. Earl Albert married Ethel Dundas Murray. Irvin Wallace married Verna May Hoy. Clark Alexander married Selma Evelyn Davis. And the youngest was James Milton. And the third child of Alexander and Jane Ann Cowan is Norman, and he married Ida May Robinson. He inherited the East Lot 40 and lived with his uncle and aunts. On account of ill health, the farm was rented and later sold to Carmen Morrison, and later after that to Valerie Doyle. Norma and Ida May had 3 children. John Milton married Lillian Dowdall. They had 2 children, John and Karen. James Garfield married Lila Flagg of Hullville. He was born in Vernon. Garfield, as he was known, joined the army and served with the 5th Canadian Armoured Division in England, Italy, and Northwest Holland from 1943 to 1945. He was discharged in 1945 but rejoined in 1956 as a mechanic. He retired as a light aircraft mechanic in 1969 after serving in Whitehorse, Rivers, and Shiloh. He was awarded the Canadian Volunteer Service Medal with Clasp, the 1939-45 Star, and the France and Germany Star, and the Italy Star. Garfield and Lila had 1 child, Keith, and Keith's son David is the 6th-generation McCaul residing in Osgoode. Their 3rd child, of Norma and Ida May, was Isabel Gertrude, and she married Gordon Merritt Saunders, and they had 1 child of their own, Sybil. Isabel and Gordon lived on Lyon Street in Osgoode, and they were our neighbors growing up. Mr. Gordon Saunders is the branch of the Saunders family that I haven't covered yet. We talked about Bob and Irene, and Uncle Charlie, of course, as you recall, but not Gordon's family yet. We will certainly cover them in a future episode. And that is our historical segment for this week. Today's Community Voices comes from the Rideau Township Historical Society by Dora Stamp, and it's called It Happened in Rideau, 19th Century Manotick Businesswomen. The source is from Manotick Then and Now by Dora Stamp, which was published by the Rideau Township Historical Society in 2009. Previous stories in this series have recalled village merchants and craftsmen with only passing mention of women's contributions to this business life of the community. Looking at 19th century photographs, one can imagine the painstaking work of dressmakers and milliners in outfitting Milady in a voluptuous gown, with frills, flounces, ruffles, and bustles, topped by a spectacular headpiece created from a miscellaneous of satins, ribbons, veilings, and feathers. In the late 1880s, 3 sisters, Eliza, Maria, and Rebecca Smith, rented the old Lindsay warehouse. In 2009, part of the Lindsay McCaffrey store. In 2024, it's where Manotick Windows and Doors was, where they soon built up a promising clientele. Prior to 1898, the sisters moved to a larger quarters in the 2nd story of a home across the street, just north of the present Tom's Garage on Main Street, approximately where the Manotick Paint Store is now located. A couple of years later, the ladies again crossed the street and invested their savings in the purchase of the former home of Captain Peter Davidson at 5550 Main Street, at the John Street, which is now O'Grady Street intersection. In 1902, the trio was broken when Eliza married Thomas Cummings, a local carpenter and contractor. Maria and Rebecca continued dressmaking in the community for several years, often working in their clients' homes. The name Miss Pollock Milliner appears in a listing of Manotick businesses in the Ontario Gazette and Directory in 1869 from C.E. Anderson and Company. It is believed her father was a furrier and that the milliner's shop was on the east side of Main Street to the south of O'Grady Street intersection. By the mid-1880s, the oldest Atkinson daughter, Isabella Musgrove, was doing millinery work above her husband's Mill Street tinsmithing shop on Mill Street. It's around where Take Another Bite would be now. And a 3rd milliner, Valletta McCaul, had set up shop in the Lindsay warehouse at 5546 Main Street prior to the Smith sisters. Later, Miss McCaul moved the shop supposedly vacated by Miss Pollock. There she continued until her marriage to Albert Murdoch of Osgoode in 1902. Miss McCaul was succeeded by Margaret Clapp, whose father owned the property on which the millinery shop was situated. William Clapp had moved to Manotick from Marlborough Township in the 1870s. He purchased Main Street properties running both north and south of the O'Grady Street intersection. The former Clapp home, since remodeled, is on the southeast corner of O'Grady and Main Streets. Mr. Clapp was a plasterer by trade, and his workmanship is in many of the older buildings in the area. His son William worked for many years as a painter and decorator. Although Margaret Clapp's millinery shop had closed by the mid-1920s, she continued to sell hats from the family home where her sister Julia also did some dressmaking. And thank you to Dora Stamp for sharing all of that information about the women in Manotick. And that is our Community Voices segment for this week. In today's mental health moment, I want to briefly mention something that hit our community this past week. There was an article shared about a local man who has been charged with a number of charges after an indecent acts investigation by the Grenville and OPP police forces. Without going into all of the details, you can read the charges online. This accused has victimized a number of women and men in our community over quite a long period of time, some of whom are my podcast listeners and their family members. My message is not to not do things like he has done. My message is that if anything like this happens to you, if someone says something to you or sends you something that's inappropriate in any way, to tell someone. If you see or hear of this happening to someone you know, talk to them about it so that they can come forward to authorities. No one ever thinks that the thing that they're going through is happening or has happened to anyone else. They often think that it's just them, that it's their fault, that they sent the wrong message, or that no one will understand or no one will listen. But what we've already learned from this case over just a few days is that none of the victims were alone. It was not their fault. They did not send the wrong message, and people are listening. There are many victims, and apparently over a long period of time, and a lot of them are just now realizing that they were not alone. See something, say something is a real thing. My thoughts are with the women and the men who are dealing with this unearthing of awful details and evidence as the case builds. Mental health can only be kept healthy if you process what's going on in yours. And that's this week's mental health moment. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of our Osgoode Community Chronicles. I hope you enjoyed our connections from the past and our taste of the present. I hope you enjoyed hearing a little bit about the millinery trade and where many of the women got into business over the early years and perhaps before they settled down to get married and have families, and a little bit about the McCaul family as well. Be sure to tune in for next week's episode while we'll share more news and events in your area and more stories of families past and present. If you haven't already, be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast on your player so we can be found by more people. Thank you again for supporting our snapshot of our local community. I'm Tracy Daviero, and this has been Osgoode Community Chronicles, keeping our rural spirit alive, one story at a time. I'll see you next week.